a lot to process, a lot to unpack from what Lee has just shared, and so many parents actually saying it's a very tricky situation when you're dealing with CAMHS. Again, much praise for the staff, not so much praise for the resources and the capacity in the system. But in case you are affected or you have somebody in your family affected by the conversation we've just had, Siobhán Leijen is a psychotherapist with the Athlone Care Clinic. Siobhán, you're welcome to the programme, and thank you.
Thanks a million for
so
having
much
me.
for making time.
Not at all.
I suppose many parents will ask how to recognise some of those warning signs that thankfully Lee was able to pick up on in her own daughter.
Oh my gosh, Lee was just amazing. It was fabulous listening to her story, and indeed such an important story to tell. I feel like there's a lot of shame among parents and in general in society around suicide ideation still, and it's a topic that we need to continue to talk about. So fair play to Lee. It was great listening to her this morning. So around recognising some of the signs of suicide for children, it's pretty much the same as recognising some of the signs for adults and, you know, other people in your family or your local community. A lot of children will start using language that would inform you of suicide. Might say like, you know, I'm not worthwhile, you know, or there's no point in me being here, or, you know, nobody cares about me, or I'm alone, you know. So in their own little way, they're kind of trying to tell you that there's something wrong, that something is not okay for them. A lot of parents might notice other things like self-injury. They might have hurt themselves or started, you know, some self-hurting practices. And a few other things then that might indicate that your child is not okay would be isolation, not wanting to engage in sports or normal activities like going out with their friends and things. And also, I suppose, really a drop maybe in their grades and that. If you have a child that generally tends to enjoy school and suddenly they don't and their grades are going down and things are, you know, not normal as you would see them. I always say to parents that come into the clinic, well, no one knows your child like you know them. They're your child. Go with your gut instinct. If you feel there's something wrong with your child or they're not okay, reach out to a professional and talk to someone immediately. Don't wait.
What can be tricky though is sometimes in normal development, particularly coming into those adolescent years, the insecurities creep in, the peer pressures, even, I suppose, the reluctance to go to school for different reasons can be, you know, it's not always going to be, parents might try to see it as a normal thing rather than an alarm bell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we have to look at the combination of those items that are involved. You know, like a normal thing for a teenager is to lock themselves away in their room and not want to talk to you. You know, they don't want to come out and engage with us because, you know, we don't know anything, Will, you know. We're just on a different planet altogether, you know. We're not in with the times and whatever else. And that's quite normal, you know. A lot of teenagers do go through that. I have one at home myself who's 13 and doesn't like to be bothered in a room. And that's fine. But I think if there's any combination of the other things involved, any of that language, you know, speaking about suicide or asking, sometimes children, particularly under the age of 12, around 8, 9, 10, that age group, will ask about suicide, will ask about people who have taken their own lives in the past. And that curiosity around it is even a bit of a warning sign, you know, for younger children. In teenagers, we tend to see more self-hurting activities and possibly more talk around no one cares about me and, you know, I'm a burden. You know, I'm a burden on my teachers because I'm not doing well. I'm a burden on my parents because, you know, you don't love me or something like that. You know, they feel maybe society is too busy for them. And these children are very sensitive children. You know, generally they're the most caring in our society. And of course life can be very harsh, as you know yourself.
So go with your gut.
Yeah.
You know them best.
Yeah.
And if you suspect something is amiss, where do you go for help?
So there's several places. I mean, I suppose always I would recommend going straight to your GP first as a first point of call, and speak with the GP, because the GP is the family doctor at the end of the day and they usually know you and your child quite well. So I would go to the GP. If you want to engage in counselling services, there's plenty of free services out there. I always recommend the Samaritans. I think they're a wonderful organisation. They're free. They're just great people who want to do good. And I always think that's a great thing in our society. Pieta House also have a free, actually it's Pieta now, isn't it? Apologies. So they have a free helpline as well, where you can get through to a fully qualified psychotherapist. And I think the phone number for that, Will, if it's okay to give it out,
Sure.
is 1800 24/7 24/7. Just for anyone who's listening there today and might need to speak to somebody. And then there's the private sector like ourselves at Athlone Counselling Clinic. We work with children as well, with play therapy and that kind of thing. So your GP, I suppose, is really the first port of call, and then if you need to be referred on to A&E, that's the next step.
You mentioned at the outset this sense of stigma or shame.
Yeah.
So parents need to manage, I suppose, their own thoughts as well, so they don't become overwhelmed and that they treat it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Any thoughts around that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for us at the clinic, you know, the care of the parent is as important as the care of the child. So what we do is we provide parental support meetings as well. So these are one-to-one meetings with a professional counsellor, a psychotherapist or a psychologist. Whereas when the child is in, we'll say maybe children under the age of 12 would usually engage in play therapy, which of course they adore. It's fabulous for them. And then we engage with the parents as well as working with the child. And we help them with tips on how to manage the child at home, how to speak to them about suicide. I mean, parents are usually really afraid to ask their children, you know, are you feeling suicidal? You know, and I've had this personally in my own life as well, when my son was feeling suicidal a number of years ago, and I think he was only 22 or 23. And gosh, was it hard to ask that question.
Yeah.
But I would encourage all parents, don't be afraid to ask, you know, because the worst thing you can do is ignore it.
Perhaps maybe the fear, though, is implanting the thought.
Yes, yeah. Lots of people really think, my gosh, if I mention the word suicide, then they're going to be thinking about that. But there's lots of research and evidence to suggest that's not the case.
Good.
You know, it helps actually to give you, I suppose, an arrow to point you in the right direction and say, well, they'll say, oh no, I'm not thinking about that at all. You know, so that dispels the fears. Some people would say they're more homicidal than suicidal, which is, you know, is it grateful to hear that or not? In one way it is.
Now, back to that idea of planting the thought in their minds. You are probably not going to do it, but you don't know necessarily what other influences are coming to bear. So how should you prevent or monitor the situation?
So, as we know, you know, children have access to all sorts of things on, you know, social media, the television even. Now there's, you know, Disney Plus and there's Netflix and everything like that where they have full access. So I would encourage all parents just to make sure that you have parental controls on all of those things. Make sure there's an age limit on that. Children watching certain content can make them more curious about things like suicide. So, and I think it really is very important to kind of monitor those things. Although I will say, Will, it's very difficult for parents to monitor things. There's still things that come through the cracks.
Yeah.
When I worked for Google YouTube in Dublin, I was working with content moderators up there. And it was incredible the amount of content. Like one group could put a suicide, for example, through like 100,000 times in like 1 hour. It's impossible for the content moderators to catch it, to catch every single one. So sometimes things do leak through the cracks in spite of their best efforts. So it's important for parents to make sure that they limit the time on gadgets and devices. Always throw a little eye on what your child is watching and ask them to tell you about the games that they're playing and things like that. And you'll get great insight from that because children want to tell their parents about what they're engaged in. And if they are engaged in something that is heavily you know, doused in suicide ideation or self-harm, or it kind of, you know, makes it into something that's fashionable or, you know, rewarding in some way. These things tend to make suicide and self-harm look rewarding in some way. Or
there are bad actors at work. And
absolutely.
we should never underestimate that. But if we can finish on a positive, because I suppose what everybody's heard over the last half hour has been heavy, distressing, and we have to take it seriously. And certainly there are lessons in policy that we can take from Lee's experience. But there can be happy endings too. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. We've had some fabulous cases actually in the clinic, and one little girl that I worked with, age 6, which is, I suppose, quite shocking to a lot of listeners this morning, had came to me with suicide ideation a number of years ago. And to me at the time, I have to say, I was quite shocked, even because she's so young. You know, how could she be thinking of taking her life? But what had transpired was that her father had died by suicide, and she simply wanted to be with her dad. I know, the little puddin'. So we engaged with some play therapy, and always we would score as well and work with the mother as well around the suicide ideation, how to, you know, prepare her child each day, how to speak with her. We engaged mother in the play as well. And that was really fantastic result, because at the end of the day, she was able to create a little boat. We made a boat which we'd sail down with a little letter in it and items for Dad that she would leave with him, and that she would keep Dad in her heart, and that she would be alive for Dad to stay alive in her heart. It was a fabulous piece of work, and I'm even emotional talking about it now, but it was a wonderful thing to do.
How is she doing today?
She's doing amazing. Yeah, she's doing amazing. She's doing her junior cert. Yeah, and getting on really, really well in school. She's certainly won some projects in school, which is fantastic as well, to see her life go on and flourish indeed.